The scent of blood hung heavy in the forest air, metallic and sharp against the backdrop of pine and damp earth. 7-year-old Vera crouched behind a fallen log, her small hands pressed against her mouth to stifle the sobs that threatened to escape. The sounds of battle had faded to an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional crack of settling wood from the burning remains of what had once been her pack's territory. Her parents were gone. The alpha who had promised to protect them all lay motionless beneath the ancient oak where he had made his final stand. The rival pack had shown no mercy, their howls of victory still echoing in her memory like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Her wolf form was small and weak, barely able to shift properly at her age, leaving her trapped between human and wolf in a painful half-transformation that made her bones ache. The hunters from the Silver Fang pack would return soon to ensure no survivors remained. They had made it clear that even the children wouldn't be spared, their leader declaring that mercy was weakness when it came to territorial disputes. Vera had watched from her hiding place as they systematically searched the ruins, their silver weapons gleaming in the firelight as they finished off anyone who still drew breath. The crack of a branch made her freeze, every muscle in her tiny body going rigid with terror. Heavy footsteps approached, deliberate and measured, unlike the frenzied search patterns of the Silver Fang wolves. This was someone who knew exactly where he was going. Vera pressed herself deeper into the shadows, hoping the acrid smoke would mask her scent, though she knew it was useless. Her fear was too strong, too overwhelming to hide from a predator's nose. A massive figure stepped into view, his frame blocking out the pale moonlight that filtered through the canopy. Even in human form, there was something unmistakably powerful about him, an aura of controlled strength that made the air itself seem to thicken. His dark hair fell in waves past his shoulders, and scars crisscrossed his forearms like a roadmap of battles fought and won. When he turned his head, scanning the area with the patience of a seasoned hunter, she caught sight of eyes the colour of amber honey. Sharp and intelligent in a face that might have been handsome, if not for the harsh lines carved by years of violence and leadership. This was Magnus Blackwood, alpha of the Crimson Ridge Pack, though Vera didn't know his name or reputation yet. She only knew that he wasn't Silver Fang, which meant he might not kill her on sight. The distinction felt meaningless when every adult seemed enormous and dangerous from her perspective, but some primitive instinct told her to stay perfectly still and wait to see what he would do. Magnus paused directly in front of her hiding place, his nostrils flaring almost imperceptibly. His expression remained neutral, giving nothing away, but she could sense the moment he caught her scent. Instead of lunging forward or calling out to potential allies, he simply stood there for a long moment, as if weighing options she couldn't begin to understand. When he finally spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle, though it carried an undertone of absolute authority that suggested he was accustomed to being obeyed, without question. "I know you're there, little one. I'm not here to hurt you." He kept his hands visible, his posture carefully non-threatening despite his size. "The Silver Fan wolves are gone. You're safe now." Safe. The word felt foreign and impossible. Nothing would ever be safe again. Her parents' faces flashed through her mind, the way her mother had smiled while braiding her hair that very morning, completely unaware that it would be their last normal moment together. Her father's laugh when she'd tried to help him repair the roof of their cabin. Her small hands more hindrance than help. All of it was gone, reduced to ash and memory in the span of a few brutal hours. Vera remained motionless, torn between the desperate hope that he was telling the truth and the bone-deep certainty that trusting any adult would lead to more pain. She had learned too much about the world in too short a time. Adults lied. Adults fought wars over pieces of land that all looked the same to her young eyes. Adults decided that some children deserved to die because of which pack they were born into, as if she'd had any choice in the matter. Your pack, Magnus continued, his tone carefully measured. They're all gone. I won't lie to you about that, but you don't have to be alone. He crouched down, bringing himself closer to her eye level, without encroaching on her hiding space. I have a territory not far from here. Food, shelter, protection. All I ask in return is that you never tell anyone where you came from or who brought you there. Can you do that? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications she was too young to fully grasp. What he was offering was more than just survival. It was a complete erasure of her identity, a chance to become someone else entirely. The alternative was to stay here among the ruins and wait for death to claim her, whether through starvation, exposure, or the return of enemies who might have missed her the first time around. Slowly, painfully, she uncurled herself from behind the log and stepped into the moonlight. Her human form was pitifully small, her clothes torn and stained with soot and worse things she didn't want to think about. Her dark hair hung in tangled knots around her face, and she could feel the weight of tear tracks on her cheeks, even though she had run out of tears hours ago. When she looked up at Magnus, she saw something shift in his expression, a flicker of what might have been recognition or surprise, though it was gone too quickly for her to be certain. "What's your name?" he asked, though something in his tone suggested he might already know the answer. She whispered, her voice hoarse from smoke and crying. Vera Blackthorn. The surname made his jaw tighten, almost imperceptibly. Blackthorn had been a respected name in werewolf circles, a bloodline known for producing strong wolves with unusual gifts. Her father had been a beater in their pack, her mother a healer whose talents had been sought by neighbouring territories when their own medicine couldn't solve a problem. If Magnus recognised the significance of her lineage, he gave no other outward sign of it. "Well, Vera Blackthorn," he said, rising to his full height again. "That name dies here tonight. From now on, you'll be Vera Ashford. Can you remember that?" She nodded, though the idea of abandoning her parents' name felt like another small death. Everything that had made her who she was seemed to be slipping away piece by piece, but perhaps that was for the best. Perhaps Vera Blackthorn had been too weak to survive in a world this cruel. Maybe Vera Ashford could be stronger. Magnus extended his hand, palm up, waiting for her to make the choice to trust him. His fingers were long and scarred, the hands of someone who had fought many battles and lived to tell about it. There was no warmth in the gesture, but there was a kind of steadiness that she found oddly comforting. He wasn't trying to manipulate her with false kindness or empty promises. He was simply offering her a chance, nothing more and nothing less. After a moment that stretched into eternity, she placed her small hand in his much larger one. His skin was surprisingly warm, despite the cool night air, and his grip was careful not to overwhelm her delicate bones. The contact sent a strange shiver through her, something she would remember years later but couldn't understand at the time. It felt like recognition, like coming home, even though she had never seen this man before in her life. "Good girl," he said, and something in his tone made her believe that maybe, somehow, everything would be all right. "Let's go." The journey to his territory took 3 days, though to Vera's exhausted young mind, it felt like a lifetime. Magnus maintained a pace she could handle, while still covering significant distance, pausing frequently to let her rest and eat from the supplies he carried in a worn leather pack. He spoke little during their travel, but his silence wasn't unkind. It was the quiet of someone comfortable with his own thoughts, someone who had learned that words were often less valuable than actions. On the second day, when she stumbled over a fallen branch and scraped her knee badly enough to draw blood, he cleaned the wound with water from a stream and wrapped it with strips torn from his own shirt. His touch was gentle but clinical, the efficiency of someone who had tended many injuries over the years. When she tried to thank him, he simply nodded and helped her to her feet, ready to continue their journey without dwelling on the small kindness. They encountered other wolves on the road, lone travelers, and small groups who recognized Magnus and offered respectful greetings before hurrying on their way. None of them questioned his young companion, though Vera caught several curious glances when they thought she wasn't looking. Magnus's reputation preceded him, and if the Alpha of Crimson Ridge had chosen to travel with a child, that was his business and no one else's concern. On the evening of the 3rd day, they crested a hill, and Vera got her first glimpse of what would become her new home. The Crimson Ridge territory spread out below them like something from a fairy tale, all rolling hills covered in dense forest and dotted with clearings where buildings had been constructed in harmony with the natural landscape. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin ribbons against the darkening sky, and she could see figures moving between the structures, going about their evening routines with the unhurried pace of people who felt secure in that environment. The pack house itself was an impressive structure, built from local stone and timber, in a style that seemed to grow organically from the hillside. It was larger than anything Vera had ever seen, with multiple levels and wings that suggested it housed far more people than her old pack's simple cabins ever could. Gardens surrounded the building, neat rows of vegetables and herbs that spoke to careful planning and abundant resources. This was clearly a thriving community, one that had known peace long enough to invest in beauty as well as function. "Home," Magnus said simply, the first word he had spoken in hours. There was something in his voice when he said it, a note of pride or satisfaction that suggested this place meant more to him than just territory to be defended. This was something he had built, something that reflected his vision of what a pack could be. As they approached the main building, figures emerged from various doorways and gathered in the courtyard. Vera instinctively moved closer to Magnus, overwhelmed by the number of unfamiliar faces and scents. These wolves carried themselves differently than her old pack members had, with a confidence that spoke to excellent leadership and abundant resources. They were well-fed, well-armed, and clearly devoted to their alpha, though she noticed that their respect was mixed with a healthy dose of wariness. Magnus raised a hand for silence, and the assembled pack members immediately focused their attention on him. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the courtyard without him needing to raise it, a testament to the natural authority that radiated from his presence. "This is Vera," he announced, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "She will be staying with us, Anyone who has questions about her presence can address them to me directly. The message was clear. She was under his personal protection, and challenging her right to be there would be tantamount to challenging him. Several pack members nodded in understanding, while others exchanged glances that suggested this wasn't the first time their alpha had made such a declaration. It occurred to Vera that Magnus might have a history of taking in strays, though something about the way he spoke suggested her situation was unique. An older woman stepped forward from the crowd, her greying hair pulled back in a practical bun and her clothes marked with what appeared to be flour. She had the look of someone accustomed to managing large households, her movements efficient and her expression kind but shrewd. When she looked at Vera, her eyes softened with genuine warmth, the first truly maternal expression the child had seen since losing her own mother. "I'm Elena," the woman said, crouching down to Vera's level much as Magnus had done in the forest. "I manage the kitchens here, among other things. Are you hungry, sweetheart? I have fresh bread cooling, and I think there might be some honey to go with it." The mention of food made Vera's stomach clench with need. She had eaten sparingly during their journey, more concerned with putting distance between herself and the massacre than with proper nutrition. The offer of bread and honey sounded impossibly luxurious after days of dried meat and stream water. She looked up at Magnus uncertainly, unsure if accepting would be presumptuous. He gave her a small nod of permission, and she turned back to Elena with something approaching eagerness. The older woman's smile widened, and she extended her hand in an invitation that somehow felt different from Magnus's earlier gesture. Where his had been about survival and protection, Elena's was about comfort and belonging. "Come along then," Elena said, rising and gently guiding Vera toward what was presumably the kitchen entrance. "Let's get some food in you, and then we'll see about finding you a proper place to sleep. Magnus, will you be joining us?" "Later," he replied, his attention already turning to several pack members who appeared to need his care. "Immediate attention. Make sure she has everything she needs." As Elena led her away from the crowd, Vera glanced back once to see Magnus deep in conversation with his beta and several other important-looking wolves. Even from a distance, she could see the weight of leadership in his posture, the way others deferred to his judgment and waited for his approval before acting on their own initiatives. He had saved her life, but clearly his responsibilities extended far beyond one lost child. She was just another burden to be managed, another problem to be solved in the endless list of challenges that came with running a pack this size. The kitchen was a warm, welcoming space that smelled of fresh bread and herbs. Elena settled Vera at a small table in the corner and busied herself gathering food and drink, maintaining a steady stream of gentle chatter that required no response but filled the silence with something approaching comfort. The bread was still warm from the oven, and the honey was thick and golden, better than anything Vera remembered eating even before her world had ended. "You'll stay in the guest quarters tonight," Elena explained as she worked, "but we'll need to find you something more permanent tomorrow. Magnus mentioned you might be staying with us for a while." She paused in her bustling to give Vera a searching look. "Is that what you want, child? To stay here?" It was the first time anyone had asked what she wanted since the night of the massacre, and the question caught her off guard. Want seemed like such a small word for the tangle of emotions churning in her chest. She wanted her parents back. She wanted her old life, her old pack, her old sense of security in a world that made sense. But since none of those things were possible, Staying here with Magnus and Elena and the promise of safety felt like the best option available. Yes, she said quietly, and meant it. I want to stay. Elena's expression softened further, and she reached across the table to briefly squeeze Vera's hand. Then you will. Magnus doesn't make promises lightly, and if he said you'd be safe here, then that's exactly what you'll be. This pack takes care of its own, and you're one of us now. The words settled something anxious in Vera's chest, though she couldn't quite bring herself to believe them fully. Trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, and through consistent actions rather than kind words. But it was a start, and after everything that had happened, the start felt like more than she had any right to hope for. Over the following weeks, Vera began to settle into the rhythms of pack life at Crimson Ridge. She was given a small room in the main house, close enough to Elena's quarters that she could find comfort if nightmares drove her from sleep, but far enough from the central activities to maintain the sense of being somewhat apart from the main pack dynamics. Elena took charge of her practical needs, ensuring she had appropriate clothing, regular meals, and basic education in reading and mathematics. Other pack members were friendly but respectful of her obvious need for space and time to process her trauma. Magnus remained a distant but constant presence in her daily life. She saw him at meals, where he sat at the head of the main table and conducted pack business between courses. She glimpsed him training with his warriors in the courtyard, his movements fluid and deadly despite his size. She watched from her window as he resolved disputes between pack members, his judgment swift and fair, his authority unquestioned but not feared. He was everything an alpha should be: strong, wise, protective, and utterly dedicated to his people's welfare. He checked on her progress regularly, but didn't hover. A brief conversation with Elena about her eating habits. A quiet word with the pack teacher about her educational needs. A moment stolen between more pressing responsibilities to ask if she was settling in well, if she needed anything, if anyone was treating her poorly. His care was practical, rather than emotional, but it was consistent and genuine, and gradually Vera began to trust that he meant what he had said that night in the forest. She was safe here. She was protected. She belonged. The first time she shifted successfully since the massacre, it was in the privacy of her room late one night, when nightmares had driven sleep away entirely. The transformation that had once been as natural as breathing felt clumsy and painful, her wolf form smaller and weaker than it should have been for her age. But it was still hers, still the connection to her true nature that trauma hadn't been able to steal entirely. She spent an hour in wolf form, reacquainting herself with senses that seemed sharper and more honest than her human ones, before shifting back and crying herself to sleep with something that might have been relief. The next morning, Magnus appeared at her door before breakfast, his expression unreadable. She wondered if he had somehow sensed her shift, if the walls of the pack house were thinner than she had assumed. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral, giving nothing away about how much he might or might not know. Elena mentioned you might benefit from some training, he said without preamble. Basic self-defense, physical conditioning, control exercises. The pack has excellent instructors, and you're old enough to begin learning. The offer was practical, even necessary, if she was going to live among wolves who might one day face the kind of violence that had destroyed her birth pack. But it also felt like an acknowledgement that she was here to stay, that he was willing to invest in her long-term development rather than simply providing temporary shelter. The distinction was important, though she couldn't articulate why. "Would you teach me?" she asked, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. She wasn't sure why she wanted his instruction specifically, only that the idea of learning from anyone else felt somehow insufficient. Something flickered across his features, too quick to interpret. "I don't usually train the children personally," he said slowly. "My time is limited, and there are others better suited to working with students your age." "Oh." The disappointment was sharper than it should have been, considering she barely knew him beyond his role as her rescuer. "I understand." He studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes searching her face for something she couldn't identify. Whatever he saw there seemed to decide him, because he gave a slight nod and stepped back from her doorway. "Very well, we'll start tomorrow morning, 1 hour before breakfast. Don't be late." Training with Magnus became the cornerstone of Vera's new life. Every morning, regardless of weather or pack emergencies, she met him in the courtyard while the rest of the territory still slept. He was a demanding instructor, pushing her physical limits while remaining mindful of her age and traumatic history. He taught her to fight with hands and claws, to use her size and speed as advantages rather than limitations, to think tactically even when fear threatened to overwhelm rational thought. More than the physical skills, though, he taught her control, how to shift smoothly between forms without the painful, incomplete transformations that had plagued her since the massacre. How to manage her emotions in high-stress situations, to think clearly when adrenaline demanded action over analysis, how to project confidence even when she felt anything but secure, because predators could sense weakness and would exploit it without hesitation. "Your wolf is strong," he told her one morning after she had successfully completed a particularly challenging series of exercises. "Stronger than you know. But strength without discipline is just another form of weakness. Remember that." As the months passed, their training sessions evolved beyond simple instruction. Magnus began sharing stories from his own past, carefully chosen anecdotes about his rise to leadership and the challenges he had faced in building Crimson Ridge into what it was today. He spoke of difficult decisions, of losses that still haunted him, of the weight of responsibility that came with power. Vera began to understand that his distant demeanor wasn't coldness, but rather the natural reserve of someone who carried far too much on his shoulders. In return, she found herself opening up about her memories of her birth pack, the small details of daily life that had seemed insignificant until they were gone forever. Her mother's herb garden, and the way different plants smelled when crushed between her fingers. Her father's habit of humming off-key while he worked, completely unaware that he was doing it. The sound of pack members laughing around the communal fire on celebration nights, their voices rising and falling in stories that connected them to their shared history. Magnus listened to these memories without judgment or false comfort, understanding that she needed to process her loss at her own pace. Sometimes he would ask clarifying questions that helped her explore her feelings more deeply. Other times he would simply nod and move on to the next training exercise, giving her space to sit with whatever emotions had surfaced. His approach was never what she would have called warm, but it was consistent and patient, and gradually she began to trust him with more than just her physical safety. The first time she called him Magnus instead of Alpha, She was 12 years old and recovering from a training injury that had left her with a sprained wrist and wounded pride. He had been checking the binding Elena had applied, his touch careful and professional, when she made some comment about his bedside manner. The name slipped out naturally, without the formal deference that pack protocol normally required, and she froze in horror at her presumption. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable, and for a moment she was certain he would correct her, would remind her of the proper respect due to her alpha and benefactor. Instead, he simply nodded and went back to examining her wrist, as if the slip had been entirely unremarkable. "It's healing well," he said. "You should be able to resume full training next week." The casual acceptance of her informality felt like another small milestone, another indication that her place in his life was becoming something more complex than a simple rescue situation. She was still careful to use his title in public settings, maintaining the appearance of proper pack hierarchy. But in their private training sessions, and the occasional moments when they found themselves alone, the barriers between them seemed to soften incrementally. By the time she turned 14, Vera had grown from the traumatized child Magnus had found in the forest into a young woman who could hold her own in physical combat and pack politics. She was still smaller than most of the other wolves her age, but her training had given her speed, flexibility, and tactical thinking that more than compensated for any disadvantage in size. Elena had ensured her education extended beyond fighting, providing instruction in history, literature, mathematics, and the complex web of alliances and obligations that governed werewolf society. More importantly, she had begun to find her place within the pack's social structure. The other young wolves had initially been wary of her, unsure how to interact with someone who clearly held a special position in their alpha's attention, but whose background remained mysteriously vague. Over time, though, her genuine personality and growing competence had won their acceptance, and she now counted several of them as close friends. She was particularly fond of Marcus, the beater's son, who shared her love of books and had a gentle sense of humour that reminded her of her father. There was also Catherine, Elena's niece, who was training to become the pack's next healer, and often enlisted Vera's help in gathering medicinal herbs from the forest. These relationships felt normal and uncomplicated in ways that balanced the intensity of her connection to Magnus, providing her with the kind of peer interaction that was crucial for healthy development. But it was still Magnus who commanded the majority of her attention and loyalty. She had grown accustomed to reading the subtle signs of his moods, understanding when he needed space to deal with pack business and when he was open to conversation. She knew that he preferred his morning coffee black and very hot, that he had a weakness for Elena's honey cakes, and that he sometimes stood on the balcony outside his office, late at night, staring out at his territory with an expression that might have been contentment or might have been loneliness. She had also begun to notice things about him that had nothing to do with his role as alpha and everything to do with him as a man. The way his hair caught the light during their morning training sessions, the rare occasions when his stern expression softened into something approaching a genuine smile, the controlled strength in his movements that spoke of power held carefully in check. These observations felt dangerous somehow, inappropriate for someone who owed him her life and had no right to see him as anything other than her protector and leader. The awareness became impossible to ignore on the morning of her 15th birthday, when Magnus surprised her with a gift that left her speechless with gratitude and confusion in equal measure. Instead of their usual training routine, He led her to a section of the territory she had never explored, where a small cabin sat nestled among the trees, like something out of a fairy tale. The structure was clearly new, built with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of personal investment rather than simple functionality. "It's yours," he said simply, watching her reaction with an intensity that made her skin feel overly warm. "You're old enough now to have your own space, and I thought you might appreciate the privacy." The cabin was perfect, designed with her specific preferences in mind, down to the smallest details. There was a large window in the main room, positioned to catch the morning light she loved for reading. The bedroom was just the right size for someone who craved coziness over grandeur. The kitchen was stocked with her favourite teas and the particular brand of honey she preferred. Even the books on the shelves had been chosen with careful attention to her interests, including several rare volumes she had mentioned wanting to read but had never been able to find. "Magnus," she began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gesture and uncertain how to express what it meant to her. "You don't have to say anything," he said, though something in his expression suggested her reaction mattered to him more than he was willing to admit. "You've been part of this pack for 8 years. It's time you had a home that truly belongs to you." A home. Not just shelter or temporary accommodation, but a place that was hers by right rather than charity. The distinction was enormous. The difference between being a dependent and being a valued member of the community. It was also, she realized, a sign that he saw her as an adult rather than the child he had rescued. The implications of that shift in perspective were complex and troubling in ways she wasn't ready to examine too closely. Over the following months, as she settled into her new living situation, Vera became increasingly aware of changes in herself that went beyond simple maturation. Her wolf was becoming stronger and more assertive, demanding recognition and respect from other pack members in ways that sometimes surprised her. Her human form was developing curves and strength that drew attention she wasn't entirely comfortable receiving. Most confusing of all, her relationship with Magnus was evolving in directions that felt simultaneously natural and completely inappropriate. The change became impossible to deny during a pack celebration that fall, when several neighbouring alphas had visited to renew territorial agreements and discuss mutual defence strategies. The gathering was both social and political, requiring careful navigation of complex relationships and ancient protocols. Vera had been included in the festivities, as befitted her status as a pack member, though she was expected to observe more than participate in the actual negotiations. She had chosen her dress carefully, a deep blue that Elena had assured her brought out her eyes and made her look appropriately mature for such an important occasion. The garment was more form-fitting than her usual practical clothing, designed to project confidence and sophistication, rather than simple functionality. She had braided her dark hair into an elegant updo and even accepted Catherine's offer to apply a subtle amount of makeup, wanting to represent Magnus's pack well in front of the visiting dignitaries. The effort had been more successful than she anticipated. Several of the visiting wolves had paid her compliments that bordered on flirtation, clearly seeing her as an eligible young woman rather than just another pack member. She had handled their attention with the poise Magnus had taught her, friendly but not encouraging, maintaining the perfect balance between courtesy and distance. It was during one such interaction, when a particularly persistent young alpha had been regaling her with stories of his pack's recent victories, that she became aware of Magnus watching them from across the room. His expression was carefully neutral, but there was something in his posture that suggested he was not entirely pleased with the attention she was receiving. When their eyes met across the crowded space, the intensity of his gaze sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. Later that night, after the guests had retired and the pack members had begun cleaning up from the celebration, Magnus appeared at her side as she gathered abandoned plates and glasses from the main hall. His presence was as commanding as always, but there was something different in the air between them, a tension that hadn't existed before. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said, taking a stack of dishes from her hands with movements that brought him closer than strictly necessary. The visiting alphas were impressed. "Thank you," she replied, hyper-aware of his proximity and the way his scent seemed to wrap around her like a physical presence. "I tried to remember everything you taught me about pack politics and diplomacy. You did more than that." His voice was lower than usual, almost rough around the edges. "You've grown into a remarkable young woman, Vera. Your parents would be proud." The mention of her birth parents should have brought the usual pang of loss and longing. Instead, all she could focus on was the way he was looking at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. There was appreciation in his gaze, but also something darker and more complicated that made her pulse quicken with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Magnus," she began, not sure what she wanted to say, but needing to fill the charged silence between them. "You should get some rest," he said abruptly, stepping back and breaking the spell that had seemed to hold them both captive. "Tomorrow we'll be busy with the delegation's departures." She nodded, disappointed by the retreat, but also somewhat relieved. Whatever had been building between them felt too large and dangerous to explore without careful consideration. She was still trying to understand her own feelings, let alone navigate the complex dynamics of her relationship with the man who had raised her. But as she made her way back to her cabin that night, she couldn't shake the memory of that look in his eyes, or the way her body had responded to his proximity. Something fundamental had shifted between them, and she suspected there would be no going back to the comfortable simplicity of their previous relationship. The winter that followed was marked by a series of small but significant changes in how Magnus treated her. He began including her in higher-level pack discussions, seeking her opinion on matters that had previously been handled exclusively by his inner circle of advisors. He recommended her for advanced training with specialists from allied packs, investments in her development that suggested he saw a significant future for her within Crimson Ridge's leadership structure. Most tellingly, he started assigning her to accompany him on diplomatic missions to other territories, presenting her as his trusted representative rather than simply another pack member. These trips provided opportunities for them to spend time alone together, away from the complex social dynamics of their home territory, and their conversations during long hours of travel began to reveal depths to his personality that she had only glimpsed before. She learned that he had been much younger when he became alpha than most people realized, thrust into leadership by circumstances beyond his control, not unlike her own traumatic introduction to the harsh realities of werewolf politics. He spoke of the loneliness that came with absolute authority, the way leadership could isolate someone from the very people they were meant to protect. He admitted to moments of doubt, times when the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming, and he questioned whether he was strong enough to bear it. These revelations felt like gifts, precious insights into the man behind the alpha persona. In return, she found herself sharing thoughts and feelings she had never voiced before, even to Elena or her closest friends, her growing awareness of her own power and potential. Her sometimes conflicted feelings about her place in the pack hierarchy, her dreams for the future, and her fears about whether she would ever be strong enough to live up to the investment Magnus had made in her. "You're stronger than you know," he told her one evening as they made camp during a particularly difficult diplomatic mission. "I've watched you grow from a traumatized child into a woman who could lead this pack if necessary. Never doubt your own worth, Vera. Others will try to diminish you, but you must never diminish yourself." The conviction in his voice was absolute, and the pride in his expression made her chest tighten with emotions she couldn't name. He believed in her in ways she was still learning to believe in herself, and that faith felt more precious than any material gift he could have given her. It was during that same trip that she first caught his scent changing when he looked at her, the subtle shift that indicated attraction and desire, despite his careful control over his expressions and actions. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying, confirmation that whatever was building between them was mutual, even if it remained unspoken and unacknowledged. By the time she turned 18, Vera had become Magnus's unofficial second-in-command in all but name. She handled pack disputes when he was occupied with larger territorial concerns. She represented Crimson Ridge at interpack gatherings when his presence wasn't specifically required. She trained the younger pack members in combat techniques and helped Elena manage the complex logistics of feeding and housing such a large community. Her wolf had grown into its full power, sleek and strong, with an unusual silver-tipped coat that drew comments from other packs about her unique bloodline. In human form, she had developed into a striking young woman whose intelligence and competence commanded respect even from those who might have been inclined to dismiss her based on her age or gender. She was confident in her abilities and secure in her place within the pack hierarchy, though she remained careful not to overstep the boundaries of her position. The only source of tension in her otherwise satisfying life was the increasingly complex web of feelings surrounding her relationship with Magnus. What had begun as simple gratitude had evolved into something far more complicated, a mixture of loyalty, admiration, attraction, and what she was beginning to suspect might be love. She found herself watching him during pack meetings, cataloguing the small expressions that crossed his features when he thought no one was looking. She treasured their private conversations and looked forward to their training sessions with an eagerness that had less to do with improving her fighting skills and more to do with having his undivided attention. More troubling was her growing awareness of his own feelings. She caught him looking at her sometimes with an expression that went well beyond Alpha's concern for a pack member. His scent would shift when she entered a room, betraying desire that his controlled demeanor otherwise concealed perfectly. He had begun finding excuses to touch her during their training sessions, adjustments to her stance that lingered longer than strictly necessary, congratulatory gestures that felt more intimate than professional prayer. Recognition. The situation reached a breaking point on the night of the summer solstice, during the pack's traditional celebration of the season's peak. The festival was one of the most important events on Crimson Ridge's calendar, a time when the boundaries between human and wolf nature blurred, and the ancient connections that bound the pack together were renewed through ritual and community bonding. Vera had participated in the ceremonies since childhood, but this year felt different, charged with an energy that seemed to echo the tension that had been building between her and Magnus for months. She had chosen her outfit for the evening with particular care, selecting a flowing dress in deep forest green that complemented her colouring and moved beautifully when she danced. The fabric was light and sensual, appropriate for the warm summer night and the celebratory atmosphere, but also calculated to catch Magnus's attention in ways her usual practical clothing could not. Elena had helped her arrange her hair in loose waves that caught the firelight, and Catherine had applied makeup that enhanced her natural features without appearing overly dramatic. The effect was everything she had hoped for, and more than she was prepared to handle. From the moment she appeared at the celebration, she was aware of the attention she was drawing from unmated males in the pack and visiting wolves from allied territories. Several approached her for dances, their interest obvious in their sense and body language, their compliments sincere and their invitations increasingly bold as the evening progressed. She handled the attention with the grace Magnus had taught her, accepting some invitations while politely declining others, maintaining the perfect balance between friendliness and unavailability that would preserve her reputation while not offending potential allies. But throughout the evening, she remained hyper-aware of Magnus's presence, the way his gaze followed her movements, and the subtle tension in his posture that suggested he was fighting some internal battle she couldn't fully pawn. Understand. The crisis came when Thomas Ravencrest, the young alpha of a neighbouring pack, approached her near the end of the evening with an invitation that went far beyond a simple dance. He was handsome, in a conventional way, with the kind of easy charm that came from a lifetime of knowing he was desirable and important. His pack was wealthy and well-connected, making him an excellent match from a political standpoint, and his interest in her was both flattering and potentially advantageous for Crimson Ridge. "Vera," he said, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips in a gesture that was formal but unmistakably romantic. "I hope you don't think me presumptuous, but I find myself quite taken with you. I would be honoured if you would consider visiting my territory next month. There are some beautiful trails I would love to show you, and I think you would find our pack's approach to training and development quite innovative." The invitation was carefully crafted to appear innocent while making his intentions perfectly clear. This wasn't about friendship or casual alliance building. He was courting her, and doing so in front of enough witnesses that refusing would require delicate diplomatic handling to avoid giving offence. Before she could formulate a response that would preserve everyone's dignity while buying her time to think, Magnus appeared at her side with the silent, predatory grace that had made him such an effective alpha. His expression was perfectly controlled, but she could sense the danger radiating from him like heat from a forge, and she noticed that several nearby pack members had instinctively stepped back to give him room. "Thomas," Magnus said, his voice carrying just enough edge to make it clear that this was not a casual social interaction. "I believe there are some territorial boundary issues your father wanted to discuss with me. Perhaps we could handle that business before you return home." The dismissal was polite but absolute, and Thomas was experienced enough in pack politics to recognize when he was being warned off. He released Vera's hand and stepped back with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, clearly unhappy with the intervention, but unwilling to challenge Magnus directly in front of so many witnesses. "Of course, Alpha Blackwood," he replied with careful formality. "Pack business always takes precedence over personal matters. Perhaps another time, Vera." After he had withdrawn, Magnus turned to face her with an intensity that made her breath catch. The careful control he had maintained throughout the evening seemed to be fraying at the edges, and she could see something wild and possessive flickering in his amber eyes that both thrilled and terrified her. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Privately." He led her away from the celebration without another word, his hand on her elbow burning through the thin fabric of her dress. They walked in charged silence through the pack territory, past the main buildings, and into the forest, where the sounds of music and laughter faded to a distant whisper. The moon was full overhead, casting silver light through the canopy and illuminating their path with ethereal beauty that seemed to mock the tension crackling between them. Magnus stopped in a clearing she recognized from their early training sessions, a place that held memories of the gradual development of trust and understanding between them. But tonight, the familiar space felt transformed, charged with possibilities that both excited and frightened her. "You can't accept his invitation," Magnus said, without preamble, turning to face her with an expression that was part alpha command and part desperate plea. "Thomas Ravencrest is a good man and a strong alpha, but you can't go to his territory." "Why not?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Still, she needed to hear him say it, needed him to finally acknowledge what had been building between them for months. "Because," he said, and for the first time since she had known him, Magnus seemed to struggle for words. "Because you belong here. Because you're too important to this pack to risk losing to some romantic entanglement with a rival alpha." The explanation was reasonable, even politically sound, but she could hear the deeper truth beneath his careful words. This wasn't about pack politics or territorial concerns. This was about the fact that he couldn't bear the thought of her with another man, regardless of the practical advantages such a union might bring. "Is that the only reason?" she pressed, stepping closer to him in the moonlight. "Pack and loyalty." Magnus went very still, his entire body tensing, as if preparing for either flight or fight. When he spoke, his voice was rough with suppressed emotion and desire that he could no longer entirely hide. "You know it isn't," he said. "You've known for months what this is, what we are. But that doesn't change the impossibility of it." "What are we, Magnus?" she asked, closing the remaining distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his bra. "Body. Tell me what you see when you look at me now." "I see," he began, then stopped, his hands clenching into fists at his sides as if physical restraint was the only thing keeping him from reaching for her. "I see the most beautiful, intelligent, capable woman I've ever known. I see someone who makes me want things I have no right to want, who makes me question every principle I've built my life around." The admission hung in the air between them, like a challenge, raw and honest, in ways that stripped away all the careful pretenses they had maintained. Vera felt her pulse quicken with a mixture of triumph and terror, knowing that they had finally reached the point where retreat was no longer possible. "I was 7 years old when you found me," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning through her. "You saved my life, gave me a home, taught me everything I know about strength and leadership and survival. I will always be grateful for that. But I'm not 7 anymore, Magnus. I'm a grown woman who can make her own choices about what I want and who I want." "It doesn't matter how old you are now," he said, but there was less conviction in his voice than there had been moments before. "I raised you. I was responsible for you when you were vulnerable and dependent. Acting on these feelings would be a betrayal of that trust." "Would it?" she challenged, moving closer still until they were almost touching? Or would denying them be a different kind of betrayal? You taught me to be honest about my feelings, to face difficult truths, instead of hiding from them. Can you honestly tell me that what's between us is wrong, or just that it's complicated? Magnus looked down at her, his amber eyes dark with want and conflict in equal measure. She could see the war being fought behind his carefully controlled expression. Duty and desire battling for supremacy, in a struggle that seemed to tear at the very foundations of his identity. Vera, he said, her name sounding like a prayer and a curse combined. You don't understand what you're asking. The pack would never accept it. They see you as my ward, my responsibility. If they knew I had feelings for you, feelings that started before you were of age, but they didn't. She interrupted, reaching up to place her hand against his cheek. His skin was warm and slightly rough with evening stubble, achingly familiar from years of training accidents and casual contact, yet electric in this new context. You've been scrupulously appropriate with me, Magnus. You've never said or done anything that crossed the line while I was underage. These feelings, this awareness between us, it's recent. It's between two adults who care about each other. He leaned into her touch despite himself, his eyes closing briefly, as if her skin against his was both salvation and damnation. When he looked at her again, some of the rigid control he maintained had cracked, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the alpha persona. The pack, he began, will follow your lead, as they always have, she said. You're their alpha, Magnus. Your happiness matters to them, and if you're happy, they'll find a way to accept it. And if they don't, he asked, if choosing you means losing their respect, their loyalty. An alpha who can't command his pack's trust is no alpha at all. It was a valid concern, one that she had wrestled with herself during the long months of growing awareness about her feelings for him. Pack dynamics were complex and often unforgiving, built on traditions and expectations that had evolved over centuries of werewolf culture. An alpha's mate was expected to come from an appropriate bloodline, to bring political advantages and genetic strengths that would benefit the entire pack. A relationship with someone he had raised, regardless of the actual dynamics involved, would be seen by many as problematic at best. Then we'll prove them wrong, she said with a confidence she wasn't entirely sure she felt. We'll show them that we're stronger together than apart, that our bond makes the pack stronger rather than weaker. And if we're wrong, he pressed, if this destroys everything I've built, everything we've both worked for, then we'll build something new, she replied without hesitation, together. The certainty in her voice seemed to break through the last of his resistance. With a sound that was part growl and part sigh, Magnus gave up the fight he had been waging with himself and pulled her into his arms. The kiss that followed was everything she had imagined, and more, desperate and tender and claiming all at once. It spoke of months of suppressed call, longing, of the deep connection that had grown between them through years of trust and shared experience. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard and slightly unsteady, Magnus rested his forehead against hers and closed his eyes as if trying to memorize the moment. This changes everything, he said quietly. Yes, she agreed. It does. The pack will have questions, concerns. Some of them will be angry, confused, maybe even disgusted. Let them, she said fiercely. Let them say what they want. We know the truth of what we are, and that's all that matters. Magnus pulled back to look at her, his expression still troubled despite the passion that had flared between them. You're so certain, he said, so sure that this is what you want. But once we cross this line, there's no going back. Are you prepared for the consequences? I've been preparing for them for months, she replied honestly. Every time I caught you looking at me like I was something precious and forbidden. Every time your scent changed when I walked into a room. Every time you found an excuse to touch me during training. Did you think I didn't notice? A rueful smile crossed his features, the first genuine expression of amusement she had seen from him all evening. I thought I was being subtle. You were, she assured him. To everyone but me. But I've been watching you for 11 years, Magnus. I know you better than anyone. Do you? He asked. And there was something almost vulnerable in the question. Do you know that I've been fighting this for longer than you might think? That there were moments, even when you were younger, when I caught glimpses of the woman you would become, and had to remind myself that my job was to protect you, not to want you. The admission sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool night air. How long? She asked. Since your 16th birthday, he said. When you wore that blue dress to the harvest celebration, and I realized that somewhere along the way, the child I had rescued had become a beautiful young woman. I spent that entire night trying to convince myself that what I was feeling was just a normal, protective instinct, nothing more. And now? Now I know better, he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. Now I know that what I feel for you goes far deeper than protection or even attraction. I think I'm falling in love with you, Vera. I think I might already be there. The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her heart race with joy and terror in equal measure. This was what she had wanted to hear, what she had been hoping for without daring to believe it was possible. But hearing it spoken aloud made the reality of their situation suddenly, overwhelmingly real. I love you too, she said, the admission feeling both natural and earth-shaking. I think I have for a while now, even before I understood what it was. They stood there in the moonlight, holding each other and breathing in the reality of what they had finally acknowledged. The celebration continued in the distance. The sounds of music and laughter, a reminder of the normal world that would have to be faced eventually. But for now, in this moment, there was only the two of them and the truth that could no longer be denied. What do we do now? Vera asked eventually. Now, Magnus said, we figure out how to make this work without destroying the life we've both built here. The next few weeks were a careful dance of discretion and gradual revelation. They continued their regular routines, maintaining the appearance of their previous relationship while privately exploring the new dimensions of their connection. Magnus was scrupulously careful not to show favoritism or behave in ways that would fuel gossip, while Vera focused on her pack responsibilities and tried not to let her personal happiness show too obviously in her daily interactions. But keeping such a significant secret proved more difficult than either of them had anticipated. Elena, with her keen eye for interpersonal dynamics, was the first to notice the subtle changes in their behaviour. The way Magnus's gaze lingered on Vera during pack meetings. The way Vera's scent carried traces of Magnus's after their private training sessions. The general air of barely suppressed tension and excitement that surrounded them both. The confrontation came one morning when Elena appeared at Vera's cabin with fresh bread and a determined expression that suggested this was more than a casual social visit. She settled herself at the small kitchen table without invitation and fixed Vera with a look that demanded complete honesty. "So," Elena said without preamble, "how long have you and Magnus been mate-bonded?" The directness of the question caught Vera completely off guard, and her startled reaction was apparently all the confirmation Elena needed. The older woman's expression softened with something that looked like relief rather than shock or disapproval. "I thought so," Elena continued. "The signs have been there for anyone who knows how to look. The question is, what are you planning to do about it?" "We haven't mate-bonded," Vera said carefully, though she could feel heat rising in her cheeks at the quay. Implication. "We've only recently acknowledged our feelings for each other." "But you will," Elena said with certainty. "The connection between you is too strong to ignore indefinitely. I've watched it develop over the years, even when you were both too stubborn or conflicted to see it yourselves." The revelation that their relationship had been obvious to outside observers was both embarrassing and strangely comforting. If Elena had seen the signs and wasn't horrified by them, perhaps the pack's reaction would be less catastrophic than they feared. "You don't think it's wrong?" Vera asked hesitantly. Elena snorted with something that might have been amusement. "Child, I've been managing pack dynamics for 40 years. I've seen every possible combination of relationships, appropriate and otherwise. What you and Magnus have isn't wrong, it's just complicated. The pack won't see it that way," Vera said. "They'll think he took advantage of his position, that there's something inappropriate about the way our relationship developed." "Some will," Elena agreed. "Others will see what I see, which is two people who found each other in the aftermath of tragedy and built something beautiful from that connection. The key will be in how you present it to them." "What do you mean?" "Well," Elena leaned forward, her expression becoming serious and focused in the way it did when she was about to share important wisdom. "You can't let this be seen as a secret shame, something you're trying to hide because you know it's wrong. If you approach the pack with guilt and defensiveness, they'll assume there's something to be guilty about. But if you present it as a natural evolution of a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection, most of them will accept it." The advice made sense, though Vera wasn't sure she had the confidence to carry it off. Being open about their relationship would require a level of vulnerability that felt dangerous, particularly given Magnus's position as alpha and the potential for political complications. "And if they don't accept it?" she asked. "Then you'll deal with that challenge when it arises," Elena said practically. "But I think you're underestimating the pack's capacity for adaptation. They love Magnus, and they respect you. If they can see that you make each other happy and that your bond strengthens rather than weakens the pack, they'll find a way to support it." The conversation with Elena proved to be the catalyst Magnus and Vera needed to move beyond their careful secrecy. That evening, he appeared at her cabin after the pack had settled in for the night, his expression determined and slightly nervous in a way that reminded her of their first meeting in the forest all those years ago. "Elena knows," he said, without preamble. "Yes," Vera confirmed. "She confronted me this morning. She was actually quite supportive, all things considered. She's been talking to me as well," Magnus said, settling into the chair across from her small dining table. "She thinks we're being foolish, trying to hide something that makes us both happy. And what do you think?" Magnus was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes reflecting the light from the fireplace. as he considered his words. When he spoke, his voice carried the certainty that had made him such an effective leader. "I think she's right," he said. "I think we've been so focused on potential problems that we've lost sight of what actually matters. You matter, Vera. What we have matters. And if I have to choose between keeping the pack's approval and keeping you, then there's no choice at all." The declaration was everything she had hoped to hear, and more than she had dared to expect. This was Magnus, not just as the man who loved her, but as the alpha making a decision that would affect the entire pack's future. His willingness to put their relationship first, even at potential cost to his leadership, spoke to depths of feeling that left her momentarily speechless. "Are you sure?" she asked when she found her voice again. "Once we make this public, there's no taking it back." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. "The pack deserves to know the truth about their alpha's intentions, and you deserve to be acknowledged as what you are to me, not hidden away like some guilty secret." The formal announcement came 2 days later, during the weekly pack meeting that Magnus used to address community concerns and share important information. Vera sat in her usual place among the senior pack members, trying to project calm confidence while her heart raced with anxiety about the reception their news would receive. Magnus conducted the routine business with his usual efficiency, handling territorial reports and resource allocation discussions with the competent authority that had earned him the pack's unwavering loyalty. But when he reached the end of his agenda, instead of dismissing the gathering as he normally would, he remained standing at the front of the room with an expression that suggested he had something significant to share. "Before we adjourn," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the assembled crowd, "there's a personal matter I need to address with all of you." The change in his tone immediately captured everyone's attention, and Vera could feel the weight of curious gazes as pack members tried to guess what their alpha might want to announce. Some looked concerned, perhaps worried about potential threats or challenges to their territory. Others seemed merely interested, accustomed to Magnus's occasional updates about alliance negotiations or policy changes. "As you all know," Magnus continued, "Vera has been a valued member of this pack for 11 years. She's grown from the child I found in the aftermath of her birth pack's distraction into a capable leader and trusted advisor. What you may not know is that over the past months, our relationship has evolved beyond the bonds of pack loyalty or even family affection." The silence that followed his words was absolute and charged with tension. Vera could see the exact moment when understanding dawned on various faces, the range of expressions shifting from confusion to surprise to, in some cases, something approaching shock. She forced herself to maintain eye contact with those who looked in her direction, projecting the confidence Elena had advised, even though she felt anything but certain about the outcome. "Vera and I have acknowledged our feelings for each other," Magnus said, his voice steady and unapologetic. "We intend to pursue a formal mating bond, with the pack's blessing if possible, but regardless of anyone else's approval if necessary." The statement was delivered with the same authority he brought to all his alpha pronouncements, making it clear that this wasn't a request for permission so much as a notification of his intentions. Still, Vera could see that he was watching the crowd's reaction carefully, ready to respond to challenges or concerns as they arose. The first response came from Marcus, Elena's nephew, who had grown up alongside Vera and considered her something like a sister. His expression was troubled, but not hostile, and when he spoke, His voice carried genuine concern rather than judgment. "Alpha," he said, rising to his feet in the formal manner required for addressing the pack leader during official meetings. "I don't question your right to choose your own mate, but some of us are concerned about the circumstances of your relationship with Vera. She was very young when she came to us, dependent on your protection and guidance. How can we be certain that her feelings are genuine, rather than a result of that early dependency?" It was a fair question, one that Magnus had clearly anticipated based on the readiness of his response. "I appreciate your concern, Marcus, and I understand why the development of our relationship might seem problematic from the outside. But I want to be absolutely clear about the timeline and nature of our connection. I became aware of my romantic feelings for Vera only after she had reached full adulthood, and I did not act on those feelings until she initiated the conversation about the changing dynamic between us." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room to make sure everyone was listening carefully to his next words. "More importantly, Vera is not the dependent child she was when she first came to us. She's a grown woman with her own strengths, her own opinions, and her own ability to make informed decisions about her life. She chose to explore these feelings just as I did, and she's perfectly capable of choosing differently if that's what she wanted." Another pack member, an older woman named Sarah, who had always been protective of pack traditions, stood to voice her own concerns. "With respect, Alpha, it's not just about Vera's ability to choose. It's about appearances, about what other packs will think when they learn that you've mated with someone you raised. Our alliances depend partly on our reputation for honor and appropriate behavior." This was the political dimension that Vera had been most worried about. The potential for their relationship to damage Magnus's standing with allied packs and create diplomatic complications that could affect everyone's security. She could see from Magnus's expression that he had considered this concern as well, though his response suggested he had decided the risks were acceptable. "I won't pretend that some of our allies might not have questions about my choice," he said. "But our alliances are built on mutual respect and shared interests, not on gossip about my personal life. Any alpha who would end a beneficial relationship over my choice of mate is probably not someone we want as a long-term ally anyway." The debate continued for another hour, with various pack members raising questions and concerns while Magnus patiently addressed each point. Some worried about the precedent being set for relationships between alphas and those under their protection. Others questioned whether Vera was truly ready for the responsibilities that would come with being an alpha's mate. A few seemed primarily concerned about the potential for drama and conflict within the pack hierarchy. Through it all, Vera remained silent unless directly addressed, understanding that this was Magnus's moment to lead the pack through their concerns and establish the parameters of acceptance for their relationship. But when asked to speak for Core herself, she did so with the confidence and authority that years of training and pack responsibility had given her. "I understand that my relationship with Magnus raises questions," she said, rising to address the assembled pack with the same formal respect Magnus had shown them. "I want you all to know that I've thought carefully about the implications and complications involved. I'm not a naive young woman swept away by romantic fantasy. I'm someone who has worked alongside most of you for years, who has proven her loyalty and competence repeatedly." She paused, letting her gaze move around the room to make eye contact with as many pack members as possible. Magnus didn't take advantage of me or manipulate me into these feelings. If anything, he tried to discourage them because of his own concerns about propriety and potential complications. But what we have is real and strong, and it makes both of us better leaders and better pack members. I hope you'll give us the chance to prove that. The speech seemed to reassure some of the more worried faces in the crowd, though Vera could see that full acceptance would take time and consistent demonstration of their relationship's positive effects on pack dynamics. That was acceptable. She had never expected immediate, universal approval, only the opportunity to prove her critics wrong through her actions. When Magnus finally called for questions and heard no more concerns that hadn't already been addressed, he moved to close the meeting with characteristic decisiveness. I know this announcement has given everyone a lot to think about, he said. I encourage anyone with ongoing concerns to speak with me privately so we can address them individually. But I also want to make something perfectly clear. Vera has my love and respect, and I expect her to receive the same courtesy from all of you that you would show any alpha's mate. The statement was both a request and a command, delivered with the authority that made challenge dangerous even for those who might disagree with his choice. Most pack members nodded their understanding and acceptance, though a few faces remained troubled or skeptical. Overall, though, the reception had been better than Vera had feared, more focused on practical concerns than moral outrage or personal disapproval. As the pack members dispersed, many stopped to offer congratulations or express their support for the relationship. Elena was among the first, embracing Vera warmly and whispering her approval in her ear. Marcus approached with a slightly awkward but genuine handshake for Magnus and a brotherly hug for Vera. His earlier concerns apparently satisfied by their explanations and responses to the community's questions. There were also, inevitably, some whose body language suggested ongoing reservations about the announcement. Vera made mental notes of who seemed most troubled, understanding that these would be the relationships requiring the most careful attention in the coming weeks. Winning over the skeptics would require patience and consistent demonstration of her worthiness of Magnus's choice, but she was prepared for that challenge. When the hall had finally emptied, except for the two of them, Magnus turned to face her with an expression that mixed relief, exhaustion, and something that looked like pride. The formal announcement had clearly been as stressful for him as it had been for her, despite his outward confidence and control throughout the proceedings. That went better than I expected, he said, pulling her into his arms with the easy familiarity that no longer had to be hidden from curious eyes. I was prepared for much more resistance. Elena's influence, Vera said, leaning into his embrace and letting herself relax for the first time in hours. She's been working behind the scenes, I think, preparing people for the possibility and helping them see it from our perspective. Remind me to thank her properly, Magnus murmured against her hair. Though I suspect she'll consider our happiness thanks enough. They stood there for a few moments, holding each other and processing the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. The formal acknowledgement of their relationship felt like crossing a threshold, moving from the private exploration of their feelings to the public commitment that would define their future together. So, what happens now? Vera asked, echoing her question from that night in the forest when they had first admitted their feelings to each other. Now, Magnus said, we prove to everyone that they were right to trust us. We show them that our bond makes the pack stronger, not weaker. We build the future we both want, together. The months that followed were a period of adjustment for both the couple and the pack as a whole. True to Elena's predictions, most pack members adapted to the new dynamic relatively quickly, their initial concerns giving way to acceptance as they observed the positive effects of Magnus and Vera's open relationship on pack morale and leadership effectiveness. Magnus seemed more relaxed and confident than Vera had ever seen him, the constant tension of suppressing his feelings replaced by a contentment that radiated through his interactions with all pack members. His decision-making remained as sharp as ever, but it was now tempered by a happiness that made him more approachable and less isolated in his leadership role. Vera, meanwhile, found herself naturally settling into the responsibilities that came with being an alpha's acknowledged mate. She took on more formal duties in pack administration, handled diplomatic communications with allied territories, and began training some of the more promising young pack members in advanced combat techniques. The role suited her perfectly, utilizing all the skills Magnus had helped her develop while giving her the authority to implement her own ideas about pack management and development. Their relationship deepened beyond the initial passion and romantic excitement into something more substantial and enduring. They discovered new facets of each other's personalities, learned to navigate the challenges of combining their individual leadership styles into a cohesive partnership, and developed the kind of unspoken communication that made them formidable as a team. The formal mating ceremony took place 6 months after their public announcement, during the autumn equinox celebration that marked the transition from summer's abundance to winter's conservation. The ritual itself was ancient and powerful, a sacred bonding that connected them not just emotionally but spiritually, creating the kind of permanent link that could only be severed by death. Vera had never felt anything like the moment when their bond locked into place. The sudden awareness of Magnus's emotions and physical sensations as if they were her own. It was overwhelming and intimate beyond anything she had imagined, a connection that went deeper than mere attraction or even love. They were truly mated now, bound together in ways that transcended normal human or even werewolf relationships. The celebration that followed was one of the most joyous in Crimson Ridge's recent history, with allied packs sending representatives and gifts to honor the new mating bond. Even some of the pack members who had been initially skeptical seemed caught up in the happiness of the occasion, their remaining reservations apparently set aside in favor of community celebration. As winter settled over the territory, Vera and Magnus established new routines that reflected their changed status and deepened bond. They moved into the Alpha's quarters together, combining their belongings and creating a shared space that felt like home to both of them. Their morning training sessions became opportunities for private conversation and intimate connection before the day's responsibilities claimed their attention. Most importantly, they began planning for the pack's future with the long-term perspective that only came with a stable leadership partnership. Discussions about territorial expansion, alliance negotiations, and succession planning took on new urgency and coherence now that Magnus had a permanent partner to share the burdens and benefits of leadership. The first real test of their new dynamic came in early spring, when territorial disputes with a neighboring pack threatened to escalate into open warfare. The situation required delicate diplomatic handling combined with credible displays of strength, exactly the kind of complex challenge that benefited from their complementary skills and perspectives. Magnus handled the direct negotiations with his usual combination of authority and strategic thinking, while Vera managed the intelligence gathering and alliance coordination that would be crucial if conflict became unavoidable. Their ability to work seamlessly together, anticipating each other's needs and supporting each other's decisions without need for extensive consultation, impressed both their own pack members and the outside observers who were watching the situation develop. When the crisis was ultimately resolved through a combination of diplomatic compromise and strategic positioning that avoided bloodshed while protecting Crimson Ridge's interests, both Magnus and Vera received credit for the successful outcome. More importantly, the pack's confidence in their leadership partnership was solidified, removing the last lingering doubts about the wisdom of their mating bond. By the time Summer returned to the territory, bringing with it the anniversary of their first acknowledgement of feelings for each other, Vera could hardly remember what her life had been like before Magnus had become her mate as well as her alpha. The fears and uncertainties that had plagued their early relationship seemed distant and almost quaint, replaced by a security and happiness that felt both earned and sustainable. Standing in the same clearing where Magnus had finally admitted his love for her, now confident in their bond and their shared future, Vera reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them to this point. From the traumatized child hiding behind a fallen log to the mature woman who stood as equal partner to one of the most respected alphas in the region, her transformation had been remarkable even by Werewolf standards. But it was the transformation in Magnus that truly amazed her. The lonely, isolated leader she had first glimpsed in the forest had evolved into a man capable of deep love and partnership, someone willing to risk everything he had built for the chance at genuine happiness. That he had chosen her, had seen in the broken child he rescued the potential for the woman she had become, still filled her with wonder and gratitude. "Regrets?" Magnus asked, appearing behind her with the silent grace that still caught her off guard sometimes despite their mate bond. "None," she replied without hesitation, turning to face the man who had saved her life and given her everything she had never dared to dream possible. "How could I regret the path that led me to you?" Magnus smiled, the expression transforming his stern features into something warm and approachable that still took her breath away even after months of marriage. He pulled her into his arms with the easy confidence of a man secure in his mate's love, and she melted into his embrace with the gratitude of someone who had never expected to find such complete happiness. "I love you," he said against her hair, the words still carrying the wonder of someone who had spent years believing he was destined for solitude. "I love you too," she replied, meaning it with every fibre of her being. Always. The future stretched ahead of them, full of challenges and responsibilities and the complex demands of pack leadership. There would be territorial disputes to manage, alliances to negotiate, and the endless work of maintaining the community Magnus had built and she now helped to lead. There might be children to raise and train, carrying on their bloodlines and their values into the next generation of Crimson Ridge wolves. But whatever came, they would face it together, bound by a love that had grown from tragedy into triumph, from rescue into partnership, from the desperate need for safety into the confident embrace of shared destiny. The broken child and the lonely alpha had found in each other something neither had thought possible, and their bond had made them stronger than either could have been alone. As they walked back toward the pack house, through the forest that had witnessed their journey from separate individuals to mated partners, Vera felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had not just survived, but thrived despite the worst that life could offer. She had been saved as a pup, protected and nurtured and trained, until she could stand as an equal beside the wolf who had given her everything. Now she was his mate, in truth, his partner in leadership and in life, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to echo the colours of their territory's name. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of pack life continuing its ancient rhythms. Wolves going about their evening routines in the security and abundance that Magnus's leadership had provided. Soon they would rejoin that community, take up their roles as Alpha and Alpha's mate, and continue the work of building something beautiful and lasting in a world that too often celebrated destruction over creation. But for now, in this moment, there was only the two of them and the love that had transformed them both. It was enough. It was everything. The pack territory settled into its evening rhythm around them as they made their way home, and Vera reflected on how different this homecoming felt from that first night, when she had arrived as a frightened, broken child. Then, she had been seeking only survival, hoping for nothing more than another day of life in a world that had shown her its cruelest face. Now, she walked beside her mate toward a future full of purpose and possibility, surrounded by a community that respected her leadership and valued her contributions. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. It had required years of patient work, careful growth, and the gradual building of trust and competence that had eventually earned her a place not just in Magnus's heart, but in the pack's hierarchy. There had been setbacks and challenges, moments of doubt, and periods of struggle as she learned to navigate the complex dynamics of werewolf society and her own evolving relationship with the man who had saved her. But every difficulty had ultimately strengthened her. Every challenge had taught her something valuable about leadership, loyalty, and the delicate balance between individual desires and community needs. She had learned that true strength came not from the absence of vulnerability, but from the courage to be vulnerable with the right people. She had discovered that love could grow from the most unlikely beginnings and flourish even in the harsh environment of pack politics and territorial disputes. Most importantly, she had realized that her rescue all those years ago had been about more than simple survival. Magnus had seen something in the traumatized child hiding behind that fallen log, some potential that even she hadn't recognized at the time. He had invested years of patient training and careful guidance in helping her develop that potential, never asking for anything in return except her loyalty and her growth into the person she was capable of becoming. That she had eventually become someone worthy of his love felt like a miracle, but she understood now that it hadn't been accidental. Every lesson he had taught her, every challenge he had set before her, every moment of patience when she struggled with her trauma or her training, had been building toward this outcome. Not because he had planned their romantic relationship from the beginning, but because he had always seen her true worth and had been determined to help her see it too. The pack house came into view through the trees, its windows glowing with warm light that spoke of safety and belonging. Smoke rose from several chimneys, carrying the scents of cooking food and domestic comfort that made Vera's heart swell with contentment. This was home in ways that went far deeper than mere residence or even pack membership. This was the place where she had been healed, where she had grown, where she had found her purpose and her mate and her future. As they approached the main entrance, several pack members called out greetings that acknowledged both Magnus's position as alpha and Vera's status as his mated partner. The easy familiarity of these interactions still amazed her sometimes, the way she had been seamlessly integrated into the pack's leadership structure without any of the resistance or resentment she had initially feared. Elena emerged from the kitchen entrance, wiping her hands on her apron and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully managed another complex meal for the large pack household. When she saw Magnus and Vera approaching, her face lit up with the maternal pride that had been such a constant source of comfort throughout Vera's years of growth and adjustment. "Perfect timing," Elena called out. "Dinner will be ready in 30 minutes, and I've made that honey-glazed venison you both love." "You spoil us," Magnus replied, though his tone suggested he was perfectly content to be spoiled by someone who had been like a mother to him since his own rise to leadership. "Someone has to," Eleanor retorted with mock severity. "Left to your own devices, you'd both survive on whatever protein bars and dried fruit you could grab between meetings." The gentle teasing was familiar and comforting, part of the domestic routine that had developed around their mated bond. Elena had appointed herself the guardian of their nutrition and general well-being, ensuring that their responsibilities as pack leaders didn't completely override their needs as individuals. It was a role she had taken on naturally, driven by genuine affection and the practical understanding that healthy leaders made for a healthy pack. Inside the pack house, the evening was unfolding with the organized chaos that characterized life in a large werewolf community. Children were being called in from their outdoor play, their voices bright with excitement as they shared stories of their daily adventures. Adults were transitioning from work activities to social time, gathering in small groups to discuss pack business or simply enjoy each other's company. The unmated wolves were engaged in the complex social dynamics of courtship and friendship that would eventually reshape the pack's structure. As new bonds formed and new families began, Vera moved through these interactions with the easy confidence of someone who belonged completely, offering greetings and brief conversations as appropriate, while maintaining the dignified demeanor expected of an alpha's mate. She had learned to balance accessibility with authority, remaining approachable enough that pack members felt comfortable bringing concerns to her, while projecting the strength and competence necessary for effective leadership. Magnus, meanwhile, was conducting his own informal rounds, checking in with key pack members about ongoing projects and addressing minor issues that had arisen during the day. His approach to leadership was hands-on but not micromanaging, staying informed about all aspects of pack life while trusting his subordinates to handle their responsibilities competently. It was a style that had served him well throughout his tenure as alpha, creating a community that was both efficient and harmonious. As they made their way to their private quarters to clean up before dinner, Vera caught Magnus's hand and squeezed it gently, a small gesture of affection that had become second nature since their mating bond had locked into place. The connection between them was constant now, a background awareness of each other's emotions and physical state that enriched their relationship in ways she was still discovering. "Happy?" Magnus asked, though their bond meant he could sense her contentment without needing verbal confirmation. "Completely," she replied honestly. "Are you? More than I ever thought possible," he said, bringing her hand to his lips for a brief kiss that made her pulse quicken despite the months they had been together. "You've made me whole, Vera. made this life complete in ways I didn't even know were missing. The sincerity in his voice and the depth of emotion flowing through their bond never failed to move her. For all his strength and authority as an alpha, Magnus was capable of a vulnerability with her that he showed to no one else. It was a privilege she never took for granted, this access to the private thoughts and feelings of a man who had to project unwavering confidence to the rest of the world. Their quarters had been redesigned after their mating to accommodate their shared life, combining Magnus's need for a private workspace with Vera's preference for comfortable, welcoming spaces. The result was a home that felt both elegant and livable, suitable for conducting pack business when necessary, but primarily focused on providing a sanctuary where they could simply be themselves rather than their public paw. Roles. As they prepared for dinner, moving around each other with the synchronized efficiency of a long-established couple, Vera found herself thinking about the children they might have someday. The topic had been discussed in general terms, but they had agreed to wait until their leadership partnership was fully established before adding the complexities of parenthood to their responsibilities. Still, the idea of raising cubs with Magnus, of watching him teach their children the lessons of strength and honor and survival that he had taught her, filled her with a warm anticipation that had nothing to do with duty or pack expectations. She wanted his children for purely personal reasons, because she loved him, and because she believed they could create something beautiful and meaningful together in the next generation. "What are you thinking about?" Magnus asked, pausing in his selection of evening clothes to study her expression with the focused attention he brought to anything that concerned her well-being. "The future," she said simply. "Our future. All the possibilities ahead of us." Understanding flickered in his amber eyes, along with an answering warmth that suggested his thoughts had been traveling similar paths. "Soon," he said quietly. "When the time is right, when we're ready to give children the attention and guidance they deserve." "I know," she replied. "I'm not impatient. I just like thinking about it sometimes, imagining what they might be like." "Strong," Magnus said with certainty. "Intelligent, compassionate, everything their mother is, and hopefully some of their father's better qualities as well." The prediction made her smile, both for its content and for the unconscious assumption that their children would primarily take after her, rather than him. Magnus had never fully internalized his own worth, despite his obvious success as a leader and the devotion of his pack. She had made it her personal mission to help him see himself more clearly, to understand that his capacity for love and leadership were gifts to be celebrated, rather than responsibilities to be endured. They finished dressing and made their way back to the main hall, where the evening meal was beginning with the informal gathering that preceded the actual serving of food. This was one of Vera's favorite times of day, when the pack came together not for formal meetings or ceremonial purposes, but simply to share food and conversation as a community. The long tables that dominated the hall were filling with pack members of all ages, from the smallest children who required boosters to reach the table surface, to the eldest members whose accumulated wisdom made them valuable advisors despite their physical limitations. The conversations were wide-ranging and overlapping, creating a warm buzz of human connection that spoke to the fundamental social nature of werewolf culture. Magnus took his customary place at the head of the high table, with Vera beside him in the position that marked her as his equal partner rather than a subordinate. The arrangement had been one of the more visible symbols of their mated status, a clear signal to both pack members and visiting dignitaries that she held authority in her own right, rather than merely reflecting his power. As Elena and her kitchen staff began serving the promised venison along with an array of seasonal vegetables and fresh bread, the conversations gradually focused on the day's events and the plans for tomorrow's activities. Magnus handled the more formal pack business, addressing questions about resource allocation and security concerns, with his usual mixture of patience and decisiveness. Vera found herself drawn into discussions about the training programs for younger pack members, an area where her expertise and teaching abilities had made her particularly valuable. Several parents approached her with questions about their children's progress, or requests for additional instruction in specific skills. These interactions felt natural and fulfilling, confirmation that her role in the pack extended far beyond her relationship with Magnus to encompass genuine contributions to the community's welfare. The evening progressed with the comfortable rhythm of a well-established routine, moving from the practical concerns of daily life to the more relaxed social interactions that helped maintain pack bonds. Stories were shared, jokes were told, and plans were made for upcoming celebrations and gatherings. It was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time, the kind of peaceful domesticity that was only possible when the fundamental structures of community were strong and stable. As the meal wound down and pack members began to disperse to their evening activities, Magnus and Vera remained at the high table to handle the informal consultations that often followed dinner. Individual pack members approached with concerns or requests that were too minor for formal meetings but still required leadership attention. These conversations were an important part of Magnus's leadership style, ensuring that small problems were addressed before they could grow into larger issues. When the last of the consultation requests had been handled, they finally made their way back to their quarters, both tired but satisfied with the day's accomplishments. The transition from public leadership roles to private couple was always a relief, allowing them to shed the careful control and constant awareness that pack leadership required. "Good day," Magnus said, as they settled into their private sitting room, the fire crackling warmly in the hearth and the evening light fading to darkness outside their windows. "Very good day," Vera agreed, curling up beside him on the comfortable sofa they had chosen specifically for these quiet evening moments. "The Anderson situation seems to be resolving well, and the new training protocols are getting positive feedback from both the instructors and the students. And Thomas Ravencrest sent word that he's successfully negotiated the territorial agreement with the Mountain View Pack," Magnus added. "Using some of the strategies we discussed last month, apparently." The mention of Thomas brought back memories of that evening when his courtship attempt had precipitated the crisis that finally forced Magnus and Vera to acknowledge their feelings for each other. In the months since their mating, Thomas had become a valued ally and occasional advisor, his initial romantic interest having evolved into genuine friendship and political cooperation. It was a reminder that even potentially difficult situations could lead to positive outcomes with the right handling. "He's turned out to be a good friend," Vera observed. "I'm glad his disappointment didn't permanent damage our alliance." "He's a smart man," Magnus replied. He understood that our bond was something beyond normal attraction or political convenience. I think he respected that, even if it wasn't the outcome he had hoped for. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, simply enjoying each other's presence and the peaceful conclusion to another successful day of pack leadership. These quiet moments were precious to both of them, opportunities to reconnect as individuals rather than as the public figures they had to be during most of their waking hours. Eventually, as the fire burned lower and the night settled fully around the pack territory, they made their way to their bedroom with the unhurried movements of a couple completely comfortable with each other's presence. The physical intimacy of their mated bond was just one aspect of their connection, but it remained important and fulfilling, a private expression of the love that had grown from such unlikely beginnings. As Vera settled into sleep beside the man who had saved her as a child and loved her as a woman, she felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had found her true place in the world. The journey from traumatized orphan to confident leader had been long and sometimes difficult, but every step had led her closer to this moment of perfect contentment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, as all tomorrows did in the complex world of pack leadership. There would be decisions to make, problems to solve, and the endless work of maintaining the community they had both committed their lives to serving. But tonight, there was only peace and love, and the quiet confidence that whatever the future might bring, they would face it together. In her dreams that night, Vera sometimes returned to that forest clearing where a 7-year-old child had placed her trust in a stranger's promise of safety. But now, instead of fear and desperation, the memory carried only gratitude for the moment that had changed both their lives forever. The man who had reached out his hand to a broken child had received in return a partner worthy of his love and leadership, someone who had grown from his protection into his equal. It was, she thought drowsily, as sleep claimed her, exactly the kind of impossible happy ending that real life rarely provided. But sometimes, with patience and love, and the willingness to believe in something better, even the most unlikely stories could find their way to joy. She had been saved as a pup, and now she was his mate. Against all odds and expectations, they had found their way home to each other. The morning sun streaming through their bedroom windows marked the beginning of another day in the life they had built together, another chapter in the ongoing story of Crimson Ridge and the unlikely love that had strengthened them all. As Magnus stirred beside her and pulled her closer in the unconscious gesture of a mate seeking comfort and connection, Vera smiled and settled deeper into his embrace, ready for whatever new adventures their partnership might bring. They had faced the impossible and made it possible. They had taken tragedy and transformed it into triumph. Most importantly, they had proved that love could grow from the most unlikely soil and flourish even in the harsh environment of werewolf politics and pack leadership. Their bond had made them stronger individually and together, creating something beautiful and lasting that would benefit not just themselves, but the entire community they served. It was enough. It was everything. And it was just the beginning of the life they would build, together, one day at a time, one challenge at a time, one moment of love and trust and shared purpose at a time. The pack territory was waking around them, but for now, there was only this. The warmth of their connection, the certainty of their bond, and the infinite possibilities of their shared future stretching out ahead of them like a promise that would never be broken.